At 73, Cora Yarbrough still believed that if you loved a family long enough, they would never make you a stranger. She had believed it through 47 winters in Bend, Oregon, believed it the way her grandfather believed the Deschutes would keep running no matter who pretended to own it. Cora had spent a lifetime making herself useful and quiet, folding into the corners of other people's holidays, and she had told herself that all of it was adding up to something: a seat, a place, a family that would never ask her to leave. She was wrong about that. But she was right about the river, and before this is over, the woman who took everything will hand it all back and never understand why. That is the part worth waiting for. So we will get there slow, the way Cora did everything slow, finishing her tea before she answered. The house sat in the Old Mill District, off Arizona Avenue, on the bend where the Deschutes runs cold and green past glass-fronted builds that cost more than her grandfather earned in his whole life. Cora had moved into that house in 1978, a bride of 26, and she had never once felt that it was truly hers. Her husband's people had made certain of that. The Yarbroughs were old Bend money, timber and water, and Cora had married into them carrying nothing but a water master's name and a knack for reading a river. Her husband was Wendell Yarbrough. He had been gone 11 years now. He was a gentle man who never quite stood up to his family on her behalf, and Cora had loved him anyway, the way you love someone whose softness costs you something. Wendell's mother had told Cora plainly the week before the wedding that the family would tolerate her if she understood her place. And Cora, 26 and frightened of losing the only belonging she'd ever been offered, had agreed to a thing that haunted her for 40 years. She had signed away her own claim to the family land, quit-claimed it in front of a lawyer with a fountain pen so that Wendell's people would accept her, so they would let her in. They let her in. They never let her belong. There is a particular ache in spending 40 years being tolerated by people who eat the food you cook. Cora knew that ache the way she knew the smell of the river in March. She had hosted nothing and served everything. She had raised her son Travis in that house, packed his lunches, mended his coats, and watched him grow into a man who looked at her the way his grandmother had, with a faint, tired patience. And then Travis married Sloan. Sloan Yarbrough was the kind of woman who said the word family, the way other people said investment. She wore it well. She hosted the holidays now in a home up the river with a view and a wine fridge, and she had a way of speaking about Cora in the third person while Cora sat right there at the table. "Mom does her best," Sloan would say, smiling, slicing something. "She just doesn't understand money." Bless her. Cora understood money fine. She understood it better than any of them. What she didn't understand was how a person could host 100 dinners and still feel like a guest who had overstayed. The birthday lunch was Sloan's idea. It was the second Saturday in April, 6 weeks ago now, though to Cora it still felt like that morning. Sloan booked the long table at a restaurant on the river, the one with the heated patio and the cloth napkins folded into peaks. 12 people came. Travis came. 2 of Cora's grandchildren came, the ones who texted on her birthday and never on a Tuesday. Sloan wore a pale coat that cost more than Cora's first car and somehow looked colder for it. They brought a cake with 73 written in gold. They sang. Cora's hands shook a little around her teacup, the way they did now, and she pressed them flat against the warm china to still them. She was happy. That is the thing she would think about later, lying awake. For about 40 minutes, she had been genuinely happy. Then Sloan stood up and tapped her glass with a spoon. The table quieted. Sloan smiled the wide, practiced smile of a woman who had rehearsed in a mirror. "I want to say something about Mom," she said. Cora looked up, pleased, expecting kindness. You can forgive her for that. She had spent 73 years expecting kindness and being surprised by its absence every single time. "We all know this past year has been hard," Sloan said. "Mom's not as steady as she was. We worry. The house is too much for her. The stairs, the bills, all of it." She let her voice go soft and grave. So the family talked, and we found her somewhere she'll be safe, somewhere she'll be taken care of, because that's what you do for the people you love. A few people murmured warmly. Someone said, "Oh, Sloane." Cora sat very still. "What do you mean?" she said. "Somewhere safe." Sloane reached into a leather folder she had brought to a birthday lunch. She slid a sheet of paper across the table, past the cake plate, until it stopped against Cora's saucer. A second sheet followed it. "It's all handled," Sloane said gently. "You don't have to do anything. We took care of the hard parts." The first paper was a transfer of title. Cora's house, the house on the bend, the only address she had carried for 47 years, signed over into a trust with Sloane's name on the line where the trustee went. The second was a letter from the bank, cream-colored and polite, confirming that the accounts Cora had thought of as hers, the savings, the small, careful accounts Wendell had left her, had been consolidated and reassigned for her protection. Cora read it twice. The patio was warm and smelled of grilled fish and somebody's perfume, and the river ran by below them, cold and indifferent, the way it always had. "You signed my house away," Cora said, low, slow. She did not raise her voice. She had never once needed to. "I protected it," Sloane corrected, and there was the smallest flash of something underneath the smile, something that needed this to be over quickly. "Cora, you can't manage all this. I'm protecting the family. That's all this is." "And the move," Cora said. "When?" "Soon," Sloane said. "We'd like it done before the end of next month, before the 60th day, ideally. There's a unit that opens up, and these places, they don't wait." She said it lightly, the way you'd mention a dinner reservation. But Cora, who had spent a lifetime watching water and learning which currents meant trouble, noticed the number, the 60th day. Sloane had a date in her head, a hard date, and she wanted Cora gone before it. Cora filed that away. She did not know yet what it meant. But she had learned long ago that when a person who never explains herself suddenly attaches a deadline to a kindness, the kindness is not the point. And then, because the silence had gone on a beat too long, somebody clapped. It was one of the grandchildren, uncertain, looking for the cue, and the rest of the table, relieved, took it up. They clapped. At a birthday lunch, over a sliced cake, while a 73-year-old woman held the deed to her own home in two trembling hands, the family applauded, as though something good had happened, as though Sloane had given a speech instead of taken a house. Travis clapped too. That was the part that went deepest. Cora looked at her son, her own boy whose coats she had mended, and he clapped softly with his eyes somewhere over her shoulder, and he did not look at her at all. Cora set the papers down. She folded her hands. She finished her tea, the whole of it, while they watched, because she would not give them the sight of her hands shaking around an empty cup. Then she stood. "You forgot something," she said. Sloane's smile flickered. "Did I?" "My grandfather's mill," Cora said. "The old Yarbrough mill, upriver. You'll want that off the books, too." A few people laughed, the easy laugh of people who think the worst is behind them. The mill was a joke in the family. Everyone knew the mill. The half-sunken wreck 10 miles up the Deschutes, the rotted timbers breaking the current at low water, the drowned headgate nobody had touched since before Cora was born. It had flooded out in the 40s and never come back. It generated no income. It paid taxes and grew moss. Over the years, 3 different Yarbroughs had tried to sell it, and nobody, not one developer, not the county, not a single soul, had ever wanted it. "Oh, Cora." Sloane laughed, relieved, generous now that the hard part was done. "You can keep the mill. Goodness, keep it. It's yours, free and clear. Nobody's gonna fight you over a pile of wet logs." "That's kind of you," Cora said. "It's worthless, Mom," Travis said, finally finding his voice, gentle and apologetic and useless. "It's the least we could do." "Yes," Cora said. "I imagine it is." She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. In the right-hand pocket where it had lived for years was a folded paper tag on a string, soft as cloth from age, the kind of ditch rider's tag her grandfather used to tie to a headgate. She'd carried it so long she'd stopped seeing it. It looked like trash, a scrap a tidy person would have thrown out a decade ago. She did not throw it out. She slipped her hand into the pocket and felt it there. The old worn paper, and for reasons she could not have named, she felt steadier. "Thank you all for the cake," Cora said, and she walked out past the heated lamps and the folded napkins and the family that had just applauded her own undoing, and not one of them rose to follow her. The valet brought her truck, an old Ford the color of dried mud that Sloane had once called an embarrassment in the church parking lot. Cora climbed up into it the way she had 10,000 times. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. She did not drive home. There was no home to drive to anymore. Not really. The house on the bend belonged to a trust now, and the trust belonged to Sloane. So Cora Yarbrough drove the only direction left to her. North and east, out past the new builds, up the river road along the Deschutes, 10 miles upstream, to the one thing in all the world that was still, by her daughter-in-law's own laughing permission, free and clear and entirely hers. The drowned mill nobody wanted. The road narrowed and turned to gravel. The expensive houses fell away behind her, and the river got wilder, louder, the way it ran before money found it. Pines closed in. The April light went thin and gold through the branches, and the air coming through the cracked window smelled of cold water and wet pine and wood smoke from somewhere far off. Cora had not been up to the mill in years. There had never been a reason. But her grandfather, Eli Yarbrough, had taken her up there 100 times when she was a girl, walking the bank, pointing at the gauge, teaching her to read the river the way other families taught scripture. He had been the water master for the whole upper Deschutes once, the man who decided in a dry year whose fields lived and whose fields died. People had respected Eli the way you respect a man who controls something you cannot live without. She rounded the last bend, and there it was. The Yarbrough mill stood where it had always stood, leaning into the current, half of it underwater, gray timbers slick and dark. The old wheel collapsed and the roof line sagging toward the river. Moss everywhere. A ruin. A pile of wet logs, Sloane had called it, and from the road that is exactly what it was. Cora shut off the engine. The river filled the silence, loud and steady and ancient. She sat there in her good coat with the deed to nothing in her purse and the soft old tag in her pocket. And she looked at her grandfather's drowned mill. And for the first time since Sloane had tapped that glass, Cora Yarbrough felt something other than shame. She did not yet know what was waiting under that water, but she knew her grandfather, and Eli Yarbrough had never once left anything to chance. At 73, Cora Yarbrough did not know how to do many things anymore. She could not drive at night the way she used to. She could not lift a sack of feed without resting it on her knee first, but she knew how to wade a river because her grandfather had taught her, and a thing learned that young does not leave the body even when the body grows old. She did not go in that first evening. She was not foolish. The April water came down out of the Cascades cold enough to stop a heart, and the light was already failing. So she sat in the truck until the cold crept up through the floorboards, and she watched the mill, and she let herself remember. She remembered Eli Yarbrough standing knee-deep at that very headgate in his rolled trousers, his forearms brown as saddle leather, turning the wheel that lifted the gate and let the water run to whoever's fields needed it that week. She remembered him saying, in that flat, unhurried voice she had inherited without trying, that water in this country was not like other property. You did not own it the way you owned a coat, you owned your turn at it. And a turn, he said, was older and stronger than any deed, because a deed was just a man's promise, and a water right was the river's. She had been 9 years old and had not understood him. She thought she understood him now. Cora slept that night in the cab of the truck, wrapped in the wool blanket she kept behind the seat, parked on the gravel above the bank with the river loud below her. a 73-year-old woman who that morning had owned a house on the bend, sleeping in a ford by the water like the river rat they had always called her. She was not unhappy. That was the strange part. For the first time in a long while, she knew exactly where she was. She woke before dawn the way old people do, all at once and for no reason. The sky over the pines had gone the color of skim milk. The river breathed its cold up the bank. Cora got out, stiff in every joint, and she took off her good shoes and her stockings and rolled the legs of her slacks, and she stood at the edge of the Deschutes with her bare white feet in the mud and looked at the water the way her grandfather had taught her. She read it before she stepped in. That was the lesson. You always read it first. She found the seam of slow water along the inside of the bend, the place where the current went lazy over the old mill race, and she stepped in there, and the cold took her breath, the way it always had, and she let it, and she kept going. The headgate stood where the timbers broke the surface. It was a frame of black wood and rusted iron, the old screw gate jammed shut with 70 years of silt and bolted to the crossbeam, just where Eli had always said a watermaster mounted his proof was a plate. Brass, gone the green-black of long, drowned metal. Cora had to brace her hip against the beam and work it with her cold fingers, and the bolts were soft with rot, and it came loose into her hand all at once, so that she nearly sat down in the river. She turned it over. On the face under the moss she rubbed away with her thumb were words she half remembered and two she did not expect. Yarbrough. And below that, stamped deep so the river could never quite take it, a single line. Priority 1908. Cora stood in water to her knees with the plate dripping in her two hands, and she understood, the way you understand a thing all at once after standing near it your whole life, that her daughter-in-law had not given her a pile of wet logs. She had given her the oldest turn on the river. The county watermaster's office was in a low brick building off Greenwood, the kind of place no one walks into unless something has gone wrong with their irrigation. Cora went in with the plate wrapped in a dish towel in her purse and the cold still in her bones. And she asked the young woman at the counter whether there was anybody who could tell her what an old certificate number meant. The young woman's name was Marisol Tovar. She had a clerk's tired courtesy and a stack of transfer forms, and no particular reason to care about an old woman in a mud-colored coat. Then Cora set the plate on the counter and unwrapped it, and Marisol Tovar went quiet. "Where did you get this?" she said. "My grandfather's mill," said Cora. "Up the river. The family let me keep it." She heard the faint dryness in her own voice and did not soften it. They said it was worthless. Marisol took the plate the way you take something you have only read about. She turned to a computer, then thought better of it and went to a back room and came out with a great flat book, a ledger of certificates, and she ran her finger down a column until it stopped. "This priority date," she said slowly, "is 1908. Do you understand what that means on the Deschutes?" "Tell me," Cora said, though she was beginning to. "It means yours is senior to almost everything on this stretch of river. In a dry year, the newest rights get shut off first, and the oldest get served first, all the way down the line. Yours is near the top of the line." Marisol looked up. "Whoever holds this certificate decides, when the water runs short, whether a great many other people get any at all." "And who holds it?" Cora said. Marisol turned the ledger so Cora could see and put her finger beside a name and said the thing that Cora would carry like a warm stone for the rest of what was coming. "You're not on this paper as a guest," Marisol said. "You're on it as the holder." Cora looked at her own family's name on a page from before her birth, and she finished reading the lines slowly, the way she finished everything, and then she said, "I'd like to learn how all this works, the water, the turns." What a person can and can't do with a right like this. Marisol Tovar was a clerk, not a savior, and she said so, more or less. She could not give legal advice, she could not take sides, but she could explain the rules to anybody who asked, because the rules were public, and she had the sense, looking at this slow old woman who read a ledger like scripture, that she was watching something begin. "Then explain them to me," Cora said. "I have time. I have nowhere to be." And that, at least, was true. They had seen to that. What Cora learned over the next 2 weeks, sitting at Marisol's counter with a thermos of her own tea and a yellow legal pad, was this. A water right could be sold. It could be leased. It could be transferred. And it could not, under any law in Oregon, be created out of nothing by a person who wished very badly that they had one. That last part mattered more than Cora yet knew. She drove the river. She pulled the old ditch company ledgers out of the cedar chest in the mill loft, the books her grandfather had kept in his slanting hand, columns of who took water and when and how much, going back further than the certificate itself. She read them at night in the cab of the truck by a battery lamp, and she found, threaded all through them, the second thing she had not expected. She found the name of the new development. It was printed on a county notice tacked to the ditch company board, a riverfront build going up downstream, glass and steel on the water the way they all were now. And the notice said the project had applied to draw a great deal of water from the Deschutes. And Cora, who now understood the line of priority the way she understood her own hands, saw the trouble in it at once. A new build like that held a new right, the lowest kind, the kind that got shut off first. It could not draw a drop in a dry year unless something senior stood behind it, unless somebody could show the lender a turn at the front of the line, a turn like 1908. She sat with that a long time, the river running black outside the truck. It was Del Pruitt who put the last piece in her hand, though she had not gone looking for him. Del was 81 and farmed a hard quarter section above the old ditch, and Cora's grandfather had quietly kept Del's father watered through the drought of '56, when by the strict order of priority he need not have, had simply opened the gate a little in the dark and said nothing, because Eli Yarbrough believed that a river was a thing you shared, or it was nothing at all. Del remembered. Old men on rivers remember who let them live. When Cora knocked on his door, he looked at her a long moment and then said, "You're Eli's girl, the one who reads the water, not the river rat." Eli's girl, the one who reads the water, said like a title. And he brought her into his kitchen and put coffee in front of her. And when she told him what she'd found and what she feared, he went to a back closet and brought out a box of his own father's papers, brittle and brown, and set them on the table. "Your granddad carried us once," Del said. "I always wondered when a Yarbrough would come needing carried back. Didn't think it'd be like this." He pushed the box toward her. "Whatever's in here that helps you, it's yours. Water's a debt, Cora. It runs both directions." In Del's father's papers were the diversion records that matched the ledgers, the proof that the 1908 right had been used continuously and beneficially for over 100 years, which under the law was the one thing that kept such a right alive and unforfeited. Cora had the certificate. Now she had the proof that it had never lapsed. She had, sitting at an old man's kitchen table over cooling coffee, very nearly everything she needed. She did not yet know what she would do with it. She knew only that she was no longer a guest at anybody's table. It was Marisol who said the thing that turned the whole matter cold. Cora had come in to file the diversion records, and Marisol had pulled the certificate's history to attach them, and she had paused, frowning, scrolling back through the office log. "That's strange," she said. "What is?" said Cora. "Somebody already pulled this certificate. Last spring." Marisol turned the screen a little, not quite showing her, professional to the last. A right perfection search. "That's what you request when you want to know whether an old water right is still valid and who holds it. Somebody paid for a full search on the Yarbrough 1908 about a year ago." Cora set down her tea. "Then somebody knew," she said slowly. "Before any of this, somebody knew the mill wasn't worthless. Somebody checked. Looks that way." Cora sat very still, the way she had sat at the birthday lunch while the table clapped. She thought about Sloane sliding the papers across the cake plate. Sloane saying, "Keep the mill, Cora, keep it, free and clear," with that generous laugh. She thought about the deadline that had not made sense, the 60th day, the hard date hiding inside a kindness, and she thought, for the first time, that her daughter-in-law had not made a careless mistake at all. Sloane had known the right existed. Sloane had checked a year ago and found the oldest turn on the river sitting under a drowned headgate in the family's name. And then Sloane had taken the house and the savings and the accounts, everything that glittered, and had pushed the one worthless ruin across the table with a laugh, and had gambled coldly and on purpose that the mocked old river rat would never once think to wade in and turn the plate over. She had been so close to right, but there was a question underneath even that, and Cora turned it over the way she had turned the brass plate. A right perfection search cost money and required a name. Sloane was many things, but she did not know the difference between a headgate and a hat rack. Somebody had told her where to look. Somebody had pointed her at the mill. Cora wrapped the plate back in its towel and thanked Marisol and walked out into the Bend afternoon. The Deschutes running cold and green a few blocks east, the way it had run her whole life. And she decided that before she did anything else, before she filed a single page, she would go back up the river and open the one thing in the mill loft she had not yet touched. The locked cedar tackle box on the high shelf, the one her grandfather had kept his real papers in, the one she had been saving the way you save the last of something. She had a feeling now that Eli Yarbrough had known, long before any of them were born, exactly what kind of weather was coming. And she had a feeling he had left her a note about it. The drive back up the river took the better part of an hour, the road narrowing as the builds fell away behind her and the pines closed in, and Cora Yarbrough drove it slow the way she drove everything now, both hands on the wheel, the brass plate wrapped in its dish towel on the seat beside her like a passenger she did not want to startle. The Deschutes ran along on her right, green and cold and full of April, and she watched it out of the corner of her eye, the way her grandfather had taught her to watch it, reading the height of it against the rocks. And she thought, not for the first time, that the river had not changed in 70 years, and she had changed in every way there was, and that between the two of them, the river was the one that had kept its word. She was not alone at the mill when she got there. There was a bicycle laid down in the gravel above the bank, an old one with a milk crate wired to the back of it. And sitting on the mill steps with her knees drawn up and a paperback gone soft at the corners was a girl of maybe 14, thin in the way that has nothing to do with health, with a man's flannel shirt rolled twice at the cuffs and a watchfulness in her that Cora recognized because she had worn it herself once, a long time ago, at a table where she was tolerated and not kept. The girl stood when the truck door opened. She did not run, but she stood the way you stand when you have learned that staying low is sometimes safer than going. "This is private," the girl said. "I know it is. I'm not taking anything. I just come here to read sometimes because nobody comes here." "Nobody did," Cora agreed, and she shut the truck door soft so as not to scare her off. "What's your name?" "Wren." A pause. A decision. "Wren Mackey. I'm with the Pruitts right now." "Foster." "Dell's my placement." She lifted her chin a little. "He talks about your granddad, Eli. He says Eli Yarbrough paid his school the year his daddy couldn't, way back, and never once said a word about it to anybody. And that's why Dell takes in kids the county can't place, because somebody carried him once, so he carries back." The girl looked at the mill, the drowned timbers, the slick gray wood. "He didn't say it was this falling down." "No offense." "None taken," said Cora. "It's exactly that falling down. It's also the only thing my family didn't manage to take off me, so I find I'm fond of it." She came and stood at the foot of the steps with the towel-wrapped plate in her two hands, and she looked at this girl who had come to a ruin to read because a ruin was the one place nobody would come to bother her, and Cora felt the old recognition go through her like cold water, all at once. "Wren Mackey," she said, "are you any good with your hands?" The girl's eyes narrowed, suspicious of being needed, because being needed had cost her before. Why? "Because there's a box up in that loft on a high shelf that my grandfather locked before I was old enough to ask him why, and my hands aren't what they were, and the ladder up there is older than I am." Cora let the silence sit, the way she let everything sit. "I'll pay you for the help. Honest money. And I won't ask you a single thing about where you came from, because in my experience, the people who ask that question already think they know the answer." Something in the girl's face moved, just slightly, the way the river moves when the wind crosses it. "Okay," Wren said. "Okay, I'll help." The loft of the Yarbrough mill smelled of cedar and silt, and 70 years of river damp, and the light came up through it gray and dim from the water below. But the high shelf was dry, the way Eli had built everything dry that he meant to last. Wren went up the ladder like a cat where Cora would have gone up like a crane, and she found the box back in the dark of the shelf and handed it down into Cora's lifted arms, and it was heavier than its size. A cedar tackle box gone the color of dark honey, the brass corners green, a small jammed lock holding the lid that no key in the world was going to open now. "He kept the key on his watch chain," Cora said, mostly to herself, "and the watch went in the ground with him." She set the box on the workbench by the gray window. We'll have to be unkind to it. It was Wren who did it, with a flat screwdriver from the milk crate on her bicycle, and the unsentimental competence of a child who has had to open many things that were not meant for her. And the old lock gave with a small, dry sound like a sigh, and the lid came up, and the river light fell into the box. There was not much in it. That was the thing that struck Cora first. After all the years of saving this box for last, of letting it sit on the shelf as the one thing she had not yet touched, the box held almost nothing at all. A folded oilcloth, a small ring of strange iron keys to gates that had probably rotted off their posts decades ago, and an envelope, heavy paper gone soft as cloth, with 2 words written across the front in a slanting hand she would have known anywhere. The same hand that had filled the ditch company ledgers, the same hand that had taught hers to write. The envelope said simply, "For her." "Is that you?" Wren asked, very quiet now, because even a guarded child knows when she is standing inside somebody else's life. "I don't know yet," Cora said, and she found her hands were not quite steady, and she did not mind that they weren't. She broke the seal. The letter was not long. Eli Yarbrough had never used 2 words where one would carry the water. Cora held it up to the gray window and read it slow, once to herself, and then, because the girl was standing there holding her breath, and because some words are too large to be read alone, she read it again out loud, low and unhurried, in the flat voice she had inherited without trying. To whichever Yarbrough still reads the river, she read, "If you are holding this, then the land has gone the way I always feared it would go, to whoever wanted it loudest. And the only thing left in your hands is this old wet ruin that nobody at the table would stoop to take. Good. That means it found you. I did not leave you the mill because it was worth the least. I left you the mill because it was worth the most, and because only somebody who still reads the water would ever know it. And that person, and no other, is the one I trust to hold the river's turn. The deed is just a man's promise. The right is the river's. Use it the way I taught you. Water is a debt, and it runs both directions. Do not keep it. Give it back to the river that lent it to us, and let it keep on carrying people after you and I are both gone under." There was a pause on the page, a small space, and then the last line, and Cora read it without her voice changing at all, which was how Wren Mackey knew it had cost her something. "You were never borrowed here, child. You were the one I was keeping it for all along." The mill was very quiet. The river ran under the floor of it, steady and old and indifferent, and somehow, just then, not indifferent at all. Below the signature, in a different ink, added later by a hand grown shakier with the years, Eli had written an address, a street in Bend, off the river, and the name of an outfit Cora had heard of, the way everyone on the Deschutes had heard of it, the River Conservancy, the people who bought up old water rights when their holders had no heirs that read the water, and left the water in the river instead of pulling it out, so that the Deschutes would run full and cold past the builds and the bridges, and the children swimming off the bank long after the last Yarbrough was gone. He had not just told her to give it back. He had written down exactly where to take it. He had set this in motion before she was born, the box and the plate and the address, knowing the land would tempt the greedy and the right would wait, patient as water for the faithful, knowing that love arranged carefully enough would outlast any deed a lawyer could draw. "What's it mean?" Wren said. "All of it." I followed about half. Cora folded the letter back along its soft old creases and held it in her lap, and she looked at this thin, watchful girl in the borrowed flannel, this child somebody had carried because somebody once carried Dell, and she felt the whole shape of it settle into place inside her, like a gate dropping true into its frame. "It means," Cora said slowly, "that a long time before any of us, a man understood that the people who shout the loudest at a table are not the people you trust with the thing that matters. So he hid the thing that mattered inside the thing that looked like trash, and he waited, and he trusted that the right one would know how to wade in and turn it over." She reached into the pocket of her good coat, the coat she had worn to a birthday lunch that already felt like another woman's life, and her fingers found the soft folded paper tag on its string that had been in there since the day the family let her keep the mill, the one she had taken for a scrap of nothing. She had not looked at it closely. She looked at it now. It was a ditch rider's tag, the kind the old water masters tied to the gates to mark whose turn ran when, and the paper of it was soft as cloth with handling, and on it, in that same slanting hand, faded but stamped deep the way Eli stamped everything he meant the river not to take, was an assignment, a name and a duty. And the name on it was not Eli's. The name on it was hers, Cora Yarbrough. Written there by her grandfather's hand when she was 9 years old and standing knee-deep at the headgate not understanding a word he said, assigned the turn, named the rider, decades before her daughter-in-law tapped a glass over a cake and thought she was handing a foolish old woman a pile of wet logs. Cora sat with the tag in one hand and the letter in the other, and the brass plate on the bench beside her, with the river still drying on it, and for a long moment she did not move at all. Wren waited. Outside and below, the Deschutes went on the way it had gone on for 10,000 years, cold out of the mountains, full of April, carrying everything that was given to it and keeping its own counsel about all of it. "Mrs. Yarbrough?" the girl said. "Are you all right?" "I'm better than I've been in 40 years, Cora said, and she found it was true, and she got up, slow, joint by joint, the way old people get up, except that there was nothing old in it now, nothing of the river rat in it, only a woman who had finally read the water all the way to the bottom and seen exactly what was lying there. She wrapped the plate, and she pocketed the tag, and she put the letter inside her coat against her heart where the closed account letter had once sat, and she looked out the gray window at the headgate breaking the current. "Wren," she said, "how would you feel about a drive into town tomorrow? There's an office I need to find on a street off the river and a piece of paper I have to give away before anybody knows I'm holding it." She almost smiled, and then, in a little while, "I believe I'm going to have some family over for tea." The office on the street off the river was smaller than Cora had pictured, a thing that powerful would be. Just 2 rooms above a coffee roaster, a woman named Priya at a desk with a topographic map of the whole Deschutes basin pinned behind her, blue veins of water running all the way up into the mountains. Cora came in with Wren a step behind her, the girl's hands jammed in the pockets of the borrowed flannel, and she set the towel on the desk and unwrapped it. And she laid the brass plate down on the map so that Priya could see the front of it. And then, with 2 fingers, she turned it over to the certificate number stamped deep in the back. The woman went very quiet for a moment, the way Marisol had gone quiet. And then she got up and closed the office door that had been standing open, which Cora understood to mean that they were now talking about something serious. It took the better part of the morning and most of 2 cups of weak office coffee and a phone call to the county that Cora could hear only one side of. Priya explained it twice, once in the language of the trade and once in plain water, because she could tell that Cora already understood the first one and was letting her say it anyway to be sure. The right was real. It was senior, the oldest live priority on that stretch, and a senior right was a key that turned ahead of every newer lock on the river. A holder could exercise it, or sell it, or, and here, the woman's voice changed the way a voice changes when it touches the thing it loves. A holder could dedicate it in-stream, deed it back to the river itself through the conservancy, so that the water it commanded would never again be pulled out onto anybody's lawn or anybody's foundation, but would run down the cold green middle of the Deschutes in perpetuity, past the bridges, past the builds, past the children jumping off the bank in July. In perpetuity, Cora repeated, tasting the word. That means after me. That means after all of us, Priya said. Cora looked at the blue map a long while. She thought about a man who had stood her knee-deep at a headgate when she was 9 and told her things she did not understand and trusted that one day she would. She thought about a deed being only a man's promise and a right being the river's. She finished her coffee, all of it, before she answered, the way she finished everything before she answered. Draw it up, she said, all of it in stream to the river, today if you can. I'll sign it before I leave this room. Priya hesitated, the way honest people hesitate before a generosity that large. Mrs. Yarbrough, this right, exercised the other way, is worth, I want you to understand what you are giving up. It is worth more than most of the houses on that river. I know exactly what it's worth, Cora said. That's the whole reason I'm giving it away. Anything worth that much should never have been allowed to belong to one frightened person again. She picked up the pen. Where do I sign? She signed it in the careful hand Eli had taught her, the same hand that filled the ledgers, and when it was witnessed and stamped, and the recorder's office on the far end of the phone had given it a number of its own, a new number to sit forever beside the old one from 1908. Cora Yarbrough set the pen down and felt something come loose in her chest that had been clenched there, she realized, for 40 years. The water was the river's again. It had only ever been lent to them. She had given it back. Then she folded the recorded deed into a clean envelope, and she put it in the inside pocket of her good coat next to her grandfather's letter, and she stood up, and she said to Priya, "Thank you. You've no idea what you've done." "I think I have a little idea," Priya said. Out on the sidewalk, the roaster was sending up the smell of coffee and the morning had gone bright, and Wren walked beside her, not saying anything, which Cora was coming to understand was the girl's way of saying a great deal. At the truck, Wren finally spoke. "You just gave away the thing, the whole thing, the thing that was worth everything." "I did. Why?" Cora opened the truck door and set the brass plate, just the plate now, wiped dry, worth nothing again the moment the right left it, on the seat between them. "Because keeping it would have made me exactly like her," she said, "and I have spent 73 years being afraid I was a guest in my own life. I am done being afraid of that." She looked at the girl. "Now, about that tea." She made the calls that afternoon from the mill, sitting on the steps where Wren liked to read, the river running cold under her, and she was unfailingly gentle on the phone, which was its own kind of strategy, and not one she had planned. It was just how she was. She called her son Theo first and invited him and Sloane to the house, their house now, for tea on Sunday to clear the air, she said, to put the unpleasantness behind them, No hard feelings, an old woman wanting peace with her family before she got any older. She could hear Sloane's voice in the background asking who it was, and then, when she heard, going smooth and warm and victorious. And Cora let it. Let her think she had won, and was now being thanked for it. And then, in the same gentle voice, Cora said it would mean so much to have everyone. And would they mind if she invited a few others who'd been kind to her this hard month, just a small gathering? And Sloane, magnanimous in triumph, said, of course, "Mom, invite whoever you like." So Cora invited whoever she liked. She invited Marisol Tovar, who had reminded her she was on the paper as the holder and not the guest. She invited old Del Pruitt, ditch neighbor, whom Eli had quietly kept watered through the worst drought anybody upriver still remembered, and who had returned that long-ago kindness this month by digging out the brittle ledgers that proved the spec build down on Arizona Avenue could not lawfully draw a single bucket without the right Cora now no longer held. She invited Wren, and she made one more call to a number Dell had given her, to a man named Garrett Hollis, who held the construction loan on Sloane's riverfront development and had been, Dell said, asking very pointed questions lately about senior water rights. And Cora invited him too, to tea as a friend of the family, and the silence on his end of the line told her everything she needed to know about who had pointed Sloane at the mill in the first place. He came because he had to. He came because a lender who has been told there might be news about the water comes. Sunday at the house on the river bend, the house Cora had kept clean and warm for 40 years and been signed out of overcake. The light came in gold off the Deschutes through the big windows Sloane had put in, and Cora Yarbrough wore her good coat and served the tea herself. She would not let anyone help her. She moved slow, joint by joint, carrying the pot around the table to each of them in turn. Her son, her daughter-in-law, bright and gracious in the chair, at the head that used to be Cora's, Marisol still and watchful, Dell with his hat in his lap, Garrett Hollis sitting stiff with a cup he did not want, and Wren in the corner with her knees drawn up. Cora poured for every one of them and sat down last, in the lesser chair, the guest's chair, and she folded her hands and she let the room settle. "I wanted to thank you all," she said, low and slow, "for how this month went. I mean that. A month like this one shows you who reads you right and who reads you wrong." She lifted her own cup. "I'm an old river rat. Everybody at this table knows it. My family was kind enough at my birthday to let me keep the one thing nobody wanted, the drowned mill, the wet logs." She smiled at Sloane gently. "I've spent the week since out there in the cold, turning it over, the way you do." She finished her tea, all of it to the bottom, while the table waited, while Sloane's bright look began just slightly to cool. Then she set the cup down in its saucer with a small, clean sound, and she reached into the bag beside her chair, and she brought out the brass plate, and she set it on the white tablecloth in the middle of them all, where it sat, dripping nothing now but catching the gold light. "This was bolted to the headgate of that mill," she said. "Pried it off myself, at dawn, in water up to here. Reed's Priority, 1908. She turned it over with 2 fingers the way she had turned it over for Priya, and on the back a certificate number. It's the oldest live water right on the whole Deschutes, senior to every newer claim from here to the mountains." She let that sit. Across the table, Garrett Hollis went the gray of river silt and set his cup down very carefully in its saucer, and the small click of it was the loudest thing in the room. Sloane's smile had not moved, but her eyes had, flicking once to Hollis and once to the plate. "I didn't know what it was either at first," Cora went on. "Mild as milk. I'm just the river rat. But my grandfather knew. He left me one more thing." She brought out the soft paper tag on its string, the ditch rider's tag that had been in her coat pocket since the day they let her keep the mill, the one she had taken for a scrap of nothing. She laid it beside the plate, his own hand, an assignment slip, naming the rider who holds that turn. He wrote it when I was 9 years old. She turned it so the table could read it. It has my name on it, Cora Yarbrough. He named me to it before any of you were born." Theo had gone still. Dell was looking at his hat to keep from smiling, and Sloane finally set down her own cup, and the graciousness was gone out of her face, and something harder and much more frightened had come up underneath it. The foreclosure-shaped thing she'd been carrying since long before any birthday cake. "What do you want?" Sloane said, very low. "You want the house. Fine, take the house back." "Is that what this is?" "No," said Cora. And here her voice did not rise. It never rose. She had never once needed it to. "I don't want the house. Keep the house. Keep the savings. Keep the accounts. All of it. With love. I mean that word. With love. I'm too old to want a thing badly enough to become you over it." She brought out the last envelope, the clean one, and she did not even open it. She just laid it on the cloth beside the plate and the tag. "This is a deed. Recorded yesterday morning downtown with a number of its own. That water right, the 1908, the senior turn, the one that controls whether a single drop can lawfully be drawn for any new build down on this bend." She looked at Garrett Hollis when she said the next part, because it was really for him. "I gave it away this morning. You can keep the house." For a moment, nobody understood, except the one man who understood completely. Garrett Hollis stood up from the table without a word, his napkin sliding off his knee, and he walked to the window with his phone already in his hand, and the deal he had built on water that was now running free down the middle of the Deschutes, deeded to the river in perpetuity where no loan could ever touch it, came apart quietly against the glass. Sloane watched him go, and Cora watched Sloane, and she saw the moment the woman understood that the worthless, wet ruin she had pushed across the cake plate with a laugh had just collapsed, the whole leveraged thing she had stolen a house to prop up, and that there was no taking it back because you cannot foreclose on a river. "You gave it to the water," Sloane said, almost a whisper. "It was worth... Do you know what it was worth? You gave it to nobody." "I gave it to everybody," Cora said. "That was always the difference between us. You never could tell the two apart." She did not gloat. She got up, slow, and she went around the table one more time, and she refilled their cups, even Sloane's, especially Sloane's, because the river ran both directions, and she had been taught to give the water back. By the next week, Cora heard the loan on the riverfront build had been frozen, and the county had quietly opened a review of how exactly an old woman's name had come to be on a transfer of her own house, signed over a birthday cake while a table clapped. Cora did not press it. She did not have to. Water finds the low ground on its own. She did not forgive Sloane, not the way the soft stories end with weeping and a long embrace. She set a condition instead, gentle and immovable, that Wren would have a place at any table Cora sat at for the rest of her life, and that the girl's foster keep, Dell's keep, would never again want for anything the Yarbrough name could cover, and Sloane, who had no more cards, agreed. Forgiveness, Cora had decided, was a turn you only opened for people who had learned to read the gauge. Sloane had not learned yet. Maybe she would. The river was patient about such things, and Cora had decided to be patient too, which was not the same as soft. She spent the rest of that spring up at the mill with Wren, and with Dell when his back allowed it, and they mended the old headgate, hauled the silt, set the drowned timbers right, until the water ran clean through the channel the way it had when Eli was alive to watch it. And on a bright, cold morning with the Deschutes loud and full beside them, Cora Yarbrough sat on the mended gate with a folded paper across her knee, a trust drawn up in the careful hand her grandfather had taught her, leaving the mill and the rider's tag and the duty of reading the water to the only one she had found who still knew how. And she handed the pen to the thin girl in the no longer borrowed flannel and watched her sign her own name, Wren Mackey, free and clear, the new keeper of the turn. The water ran clean over the mended gate. Cora watched it go. The river remembers its own.